Mary Tudor was born in 1516 to a world of absolute certainty. She was the first, and for many years, the only surviving child of the magnificent King Henry VIII and his devout Spanish queen, Catherine of Aragon. For the first decade of her life, she was the pampered and adored jewel of the Tudor court. The king doted on his intelligent and precocious daughter, proudly showing her off to foreign ambassadors. She was given a superb Renaissance education, excelling in Latin and music. She was the Princess of Wales, the undisputed heir to the English throne, and was even betrothed to her cousin, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, the most powerful monarch in Europe. Her future seemed glorious and secure, but her perfect world was built on a fragile foundation: her mother's ability to produce a male heir. As the years passed and Queen Catherine failed to give the king the son he so desperately craved, Henry's affections began to turn. His gaze fell upon a captivating and ambitious lady-in-waiting, Anne Boleyn, who promised him a son but refused to be his mistress. The king's desire for a new wife and a male heir would soon shatter Mary's world completely. To marry Anne Boleyn, King Henry VIII did the unthinkable. He broke with the Roman Catholic Church, declared his own marriage to Catherine of Aragon null and void, and established the new Church of England with himself as its head. This period, known as the King's Great Matter, was a political and religious earthquake, and Mary was at its epicenter. In an instant, her entire world was turned upside down. She was no longer the cherished princess and heir to the throne. By an act of Parliament, she was declared illegitimate, a bastard, and her title of Princess of Wales was stripped from her. She was forcibly separated from her beloved mother, whom she would never see again. The new heir to the throne was the daughter that Anne Boleyn gave birth to, the infant Elizabeth. For the next 2 decades, Mary lived a life of profound hardship and humiliation. She stubbornly and courageously refused to accept her father's new church or her own illegitimacy, clinging to her Catholic faith and the validity of her mother's marriage with a fierce determination that both infuriated and impressed the king. Her defiance placed her in constant mortal danger. She was ostracized at court, often in fear for her life, living as a pariah while her father married wife after wife in his relentless quest for a son. This period of trauma forged in her an unshakable religious faith and a deep-seated, burning desire to one day restore her mother's honor and her country's soul to the true Catholic Church. Mary's fortunes improved slightly after her father's death, but she remained an isolated figure during the staunchly Protestant reign of her sickly younger half-brother, Edward VI. The true crisis came when Edward died in 1553. The Protestant lords of his council, terrified of the devoutly Catholic Mary taking the throne, attempted to stage a coup. They tried to bypass both Mary and her half-sister Elizabeth and place a Protestant cousin, the tragic Lady Jane Grey, on the throne. It was in this moment of supreme crisis that Mary Tudor showed the iron will of her royal blood. Refusing to be captured, she fled to the countryside and, in a move of astonishing courage, raised her own standard. The English people, who saw her as the true and legitimate heir, and who were offended by the arrogant machinations of the noble council, flocked to her cause. Her support was so overwhelming that the coup collapsed in a matter of days. Lady Jane Grey, the 9 Days' Queen, was arrested, and Mary rode into London to a rapturous welcome from the crowds. After a lifetime of suffering and humiliation, the 37-year-old Mary I was now the undisputed, first ever Queen Regnant of England. Her first act was to restore her mother's good name and her own legitimacy. Her next, and far more ambitious goal, was to undo everything her father and brother had done. She would bring the Kingdom of England back home to Rome. To secure the Catholic restoration and produce a Catholic heir, the 37-year-old Mary knew she had to marry. She set her sights on the most powerful Catholic prince in the world, Philip, son of her old fiancé, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, and the future King Philip II of Spain. To Mary, the Spanish match was a dream come true. It was a grand Catholic alliance that would reconnect England to its European roots, elevate its status, and ensure the future of the faith. To the English people and her own council, it was a national nightmare. Spain was not just a foreign power. It was England's great commercial and imperial rival. The English were fiercely independent and deeply suspicious of foreign influence. They feared that the marriage would turn England into a mere satellite of the vast, powerful Spanish Habsburg Empire. The public outcry was immense, and the proposed marriage sparked a major uprising, the Wyatt Rebellion, which was brutally suppressed. Despite the widespread opposition, Mary was unyielding, driven by her personal piety and her dynastic pride. In 1554, she married Philip of Spain. The marriage was a personal and political disaster. Philip, 11 years her junior, found his devout, aging wife politically necessary but personally unappealing. He spent as little time in England as possible. Worse, the marriage produced no children. Mary suffered at least one phantom pregnancy, a deeply humiliating and psychologically devastating event for the Queen, whose hopes for a Catholic dynasty rested entirely on her ability to produce an heir. The Spanish match had not secured her legacy. It had only made her deeply unpopular with her own people. With the same unbending determination she had shown in her youth, Mary set about the central mission of her reign, dismantling the Church of England and returning the country to the authority of the Pope. She repealed all the anti-papal legislation passed by her father and brother. The old Latin Mass was restored, and married Protestant clergy were forced from their positions. Initially, her policy was one of gradual persuasion. But as she faced resistance from committed Protestants, her methods hardened. In 1555, she and her government revived the medieval heresy laws, which made it a crime punishable by death to deny key Catholic doctrines. What followed was the period of intense religious persecution that would forever define her reign and her legacy. Over the next 3 years, some 280 Protestants, men and women, scholars and common artisans who refused to recant their faith, were publicly burned at the stake. These executions were not random acts of cruelty. They were solemn, public ceremonies intended to terrify the population back into the true faith and to cleanse the realm of heresy. Among the most famous victims were the great leaders of the English Reformation, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer and Bishops Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley, who were burned at the stake in Oxford. As the flames were lit, Latimer was said to have cried out to Ridley the immortal words, "Play the man, Master Ridley. We shall this day light such a candle, by God's grace, in England, as I trust shall never be put out." Latimer's words proved prophetic. Mary's policy of persecution was a catastrophic failure. Instead of crushing the Protestant movement, the public burnings created a generation of celebrated martyrs. The courage and unwavering faith of those who died in the flames inspired awe and admiration, not fear. A propagandist masterpiece by the exiled John Fox, Acts and Monuments, popularly known as Fox's Book of Martyrs, meticulously documented the trials and executions in graphic, heart-rending detail. The book, which was smuggled into England, became a Protestant bestseller, second only to the Bible itself. It portrayed the victims as heroic English saints and Mary's Catholic government as a brutal foreign influence tyranny. The burnings did not extinguish the Protestant candle. They fanned its flames, forging a powerful association in the English mind between Protestantism, national identity, and liberty, and between Catholicism, foreign oppression, and cruelty. To compound her domestic failures, the final years of Mary's reign were marked by a national humiliation abroad. Her marriage to Philip II dragged England into Spain's pointless war with France. The result was a disaster. In the winter of 1558, a surprise French attack captured the port of Calais, the last remaining English territory on the European mainland, a treasured possession held for over 200 years since the days of Edward III. Loss of Calais was a devastating psychological and strategic blow. To the English people, it was a symbol of their decline under a queen who had subordinated English interests to those of her Spanish husband. Mary herself was heartbroken. She was reported to have said, "When I am dead and opened, you shall find Philip and Calais lying in my heart." By 1558, Mary was a broken woman. She was childless, abandoned by a husband who rarely visited, hated by a large portion of her people, and suffering from what was likely uterine cancer. She had failed in her two great ambitions. She had not produced a Catholic heir, and her brutal attempts to restore the Catholic faith had only strengthened the Protestant cause. In her final act, she was forced to confront the ultimate failure of her reign. Knowing she was dying, she had to formally name her successor. With no other legitimate tutor heir, she had no choice but to name her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth, the very woman who embodied the religious settlement she had fought so desperately to destroy. Mary I died on November 17, 1558. On the day of her death, the bells of London rang with joy, and the people celebrated in the streets, not for the passing of their queen, but for the accession of the new one. Mary's legacy is one of the most tragic in English history. She was, by the standards of her time, a woman of great principle, courage, and unshakable faith. Her tragedy was that her rigid devotion to her Catholic faith, forged in the trauma of her youth, left her completely unable to understand the country she had inherited. She had hoped to be remembered as Mary the Pious, the queen who had saved her nation's soul. Instead, the burning she authorized earned her the grim and lasting nickname, Bloody Mary. She is remembered not as the courageous survivor who claimed her rightful throne, but as a religious fanatic and a barren queen whose disastrous reign, in a great historical irony, did more to ensure the ultimate triumph of Protestantism in England than any other monarch.